Hey everyone, welcome to the Dink School of Mysteries. This would be our very first question and answer session. Thank you so much, you guys, for writing down some questions, and this would be a lot of fun. I'm actually really looking forward to this. I've one of the benefits of having a really small channel, and I know that it's super sexy to be able to say, "Oh yeah, I have 1 million subscribers," or whatever. But it's really nice to actually have a small channel in the fact that I could actually answer everyone who asked a question, which is really nice. As you grow, that won't be as easy. But while it is small, I really enjoy being able to have just such an active presence and being able to actually have a relationship with all of my viewers. So I'm I'm really appreciative of you guys. Um, so let's get right into it. Got my fancy legal pad. Angeli Marie writes, "Oh yeah, and in a couple of videos back, you said the gods are coming back. What did you mean by that? Could you please explain? Thanks." I, I'm actually I'm kind of surprised it took someone so long to ask that. I kind of thought that I would say that, and then I'll have 80 comments about people wanting me to clarify. So, um, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Um, so, the rule of thumb is that if you think you know what a god is, you don't know what a god is. This is kind of the working thought. So we are so back um, in Ireland and Scotland and the British Isles, they had fairy circles. The people saw fairies. In medieval Europe, people saw angels. In the Middle East, throughout time, people saw the jinn. In the 1950s, after a large technological revolution, people started seeing UFOs. The thing to kind of keep in mind is that whenever you are exposed to something that is so far outside of your mind's ability to even rationalize it, it's beyond comprehension. You can't explain it. It's like it passes beyond even the realm of magical. Your mind is automatically going to try and put it into some sort of context that it can wrap itself around. Right? So, bearing that in mind, bearing in mind that even though, even though I talk about this stuff, there really isn't a good way of talking about this stuff. So don't read too much into what I'm saying because it's beyond a person's ability to even register what's even happening. One of my heroes goes by the name of goes by the name of Terence McKenna. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of him before or not. He was really big in the 90s. One of the things he had said that always kind of really stuck with me is that if you ever had the opportunity to see a god or even an alien, you wouldn't even know what you were looking at. Because what constitutes life, what constitutes consciousness, is so much, it's just so bizarre to even, that you wouldn't even realize what you're looking at if you saw it. And so, that's the first thing to keep in mind. With that said, everything goes in cycles. Everything comes in cycles. And then actually, this would actually be a really good topic for a full video because there's a thing called the Great Clock. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. But the movement of the planets, the movements of the year and the stars, they're like a clock that you could track. It has long hands and short hands and gears even. The Mayans were really good about putting a lot of this together. If you ever look at the Mayan great year and how their calendar worked, it's fantastic. But we could get into that in a different video. But with that said, everything rises and falls on a timeline. Everything does. So the way it usually works is the gods come for a period of time, consciousness rises, everyone has a good time. Then at one point or another, the gods leave, and then the world falls down into chaos, destruction. And in an appropriate timeline, as the clock moves, you get closer and closer to that time when the gods come back, and the closer you get to that point, the more and more chaotic things get. So I don't remember if I mentioned this when in the video where I mentioned the gods coming back or not. I apologize. I just don't remember. But part of the catalyst for me even doing this to begin with was my teacher comes up to me and he says, the gods are coming back, and you need to go out and you need to write a book and you need to start a YouTube channel. Well, maybe not YouTube channel, but just start teaching online, doing videos like this. So that the people who have the ears to hear and can hear it and understand it, they need to be given the opportunity to hear it in the first place. So before the gods come back, it's important that people come out and start teaching the mysteries so that folks have an opportunity to hear it. And when you're dealing with something that's that big and with that much power, two things happen as they come closer to us in whatever form that takes. Some people call it the Anunnaki, some people, there's a lot of interpretations. I'm of the belief personally that there's a lot of different groups out there, but that's neither here nor there. As we get closer to the time when the gods come back, there's a lot of energy. We're talking an immense amount of energy that comes with it. So with that amount of energy, that you can almost call it electricity, two things are going to happen to a human mind. Either sorry for being scatterbrained. There's a law when it comes to energy, energetic law. I don't even remember what the specifics of it's called, but it's all energy is sympathetic. Meaning, like if you have energy in a pool or whatever, either the higher energy will come down to meet the lower energy, and the lower energy will rise up to meet the higher energy. So it's sympathetic. Energies are sympathetic. Things like to vibrate together. So when you have an immense amount of energy input coming in from something else, so two things are going to happen to the consciousness of people. You're either going to rise up to meet the incoming energy, right? You're going to come up and you're going to meet it, and so your consciousness rises as they get closer, or it's going to mess up someone's energy and you go crazy. And this is my personal belief. I can't prove this by any stretch of the imagination, but knowing what I know, from all my adult life, I'm recording this on Tuesday, the 11th, and my birthday is tomorrow on June 12th. I'll be 32. So all of my 32 years, I would say, for at least most of that time, people would always say, when are we going back to Mars? When are we going to try to get to Mars? When are we going to try and get to the moon? When are we going to get into space? And the answer always was, it's too expensive, it's too impractical, there's too many logistics, no, we're not going to get to space. It was just like, we'll go up there and put up a satellite, but maybe run a space station and conduct some tests. But other than that, space is off. In the last 5 years, certainly in the last 3, we see suddenly and inexplicably every nation on Earth tripping over themselves to get into space. It's just happens suddenly. They notice something and they just start tripping over themselves to get up there for no reason. And they're not just trying to get to space, they're trying to arm space. Put big guns up there, and now they want to get to the moon, and China's already on the dark side of the moon, officially speaking anyway. You have nations who have never even had a space program trying to get to space. So it's a very unique thing. And like we had said before, like we talked even just in the last video about Saturn and the cult of Saturn, the term called hide the dancing bear. It's a term that is used when there's something that's super obvious that needs to be what's the word I'm thinking of? Hidden, right? There's something that's so big and so obvious it needs to be hidden. So the thing you do is you create an enormous distraction so you miss it entirely. So in my opinion, again, I can't prove this, but knowing what I know, Trump election, all the nonsense with censorship, all the nonsense with political correctness, the wars, the Middle East, anything and everything you could think of is being thrown at you for the purposes of distraction, for the purposes of keeping you looking and fighting amongst yourselves or doing anything that's possible to keep you from looking up at the stars. Right? Everything is being done to keep you from looking at the stars. And everything seems to be right on track. So, that's what I mean when the gods are coming back. And it's not like I have a timeline, I wouldn't even, but it's going to be soonish. I'm not saying like soonish as in like next year, but it's going to be soonish. Okay, moving right along. Carmen Jet says, everything is looking amazing. Do you think by this 20th we're going to see a change? It is something I keep hearing. I'm not really sure what you mean by a change. I know that in and around the 20th, I think it's is it the 22nd this year or the 21st? I don't remember. Summer solstice is coming. And that's when the sun is at its highest peak. And so if we're dealing like with the Christian mysteries, for example, Christ in his sun god aspect, I guess you could call it that, this would be the height of his ministry. Before he starts dipping over and when you get to the fall equinox, when he is arrested and hung on the cross and then ultimately dies in or near the winter solstice. So, I mean, that's coming. But as far as just a change, I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I did. If you know more than I do, please let me know. That would be great. All right. Buddy, I'm not sure if I could pronounce your name. It's Z the Urx XX SEETH3RXX. Sorry, I'm sorry, no, I can't pronounce that. But See the Rix asks, how can we truly overcome our lower thoughts, past thoughts, pain, etc., and walk in a new mind? Also, do you think there is an afterlife, or do we come back in reincarnation? I know, 2 questions. So, this is actually those are 2 really fantastic questions. So the first one, you know, your mind is a muscle, right? And so whenever if you want to change your mind, you want to strengthen your mind, you want to get out of the lower brain, it takes practice. It takes constant work. If anyone, um, it's like learning a language, right? It takes you to read and write and learn all the nuances of the English language. I mean, it takes you like 12 years of public schooling. It shouldn't take that long, but essentially, that's what we're dealing with here. So I mean, it's no different from your mind, right? It takes work in order to make that happen. A good starting place, though, as I'll tell you the thing that my teacher taught me, is that if you want to know the truth, the first thing you got to understand is you have to be willing to be wrong. You absolutely have to divorce your ego. Right? You can't hold on to an ego and still become enlightened. It can't happen. You have to be willing to be wrong, and you have to be willing to be wrong as long as it takes. And one of the things I really like to do is what if questions. Now, what I like about what if questions is you could pose an idea that really wouldn't hold up, under scrutiny, but it kind of gets you out of the when you're posing questions that aren't really going to pan out but are fun to think about. They do. My camera's freaking out. Oh, okay. Is it done? Okay. See myself twitch all over the place. It's freaking me out. What I like about what if questions is that they kind of take you out of that lower brain thing anyway, and kind of put you into a creative space, a creative problem-solving space. So, like, what's a good what if question? So you could be sitting there and think, okay, what if the sun is actually the center of the earth, is the core of the earth, and we're like circling around the core, and all the stars and stuff we see out there is actually the inside of super earth. And then like maybe all the lights are shining in from super earth from out there, and we're like floating in water or something like that. That's a good what if question, right? Can you prove it? No. Is it really going to hold up? Probably not. But it's fun to think about. And you kind of think about the mechanics of how it works and all of that kind of thing. And it takes you... What's interesting about what if questions is that they reveal certain truths that you never would have thought of before. And it's just a great way. It does several things. It kills the ego because you're not right by posing the question. It helps you work through problems, and it helps reveal truths. Meditation is a really great way to take care of some of this stuff, and I'm actually going to do a whole video on meditation coming up here real soon, because there's about 1,000 different kinds of meditation, and people often think they can't meditate, but without realizing that they've actually been meditating their whole lives, they just didn't know it. So there's a lot of things to do during meditation, and so that's a really great way of killing that. So the second part of your question is there an afterlife, or do we come back in reincarnation? Okay, so this is a really good question. So here's the thing, like we've talked about before. There's an assumption that you're alive now, right? And the concept of afterlife, usually as we think about it, is that what we're doing now in this plane of existence is the main event. And then after you die, after your body dies, then you go on to like a heaven or a hell, depending on what you've earned in your time here. Whether or not you've earned salvation through a god, or whether, and you end up in some god's heaven, or through good works you've achieved enough karma to ascend or whatever. Excuse me. But the assumption is that this is the main event. The way I see it, and the way I currently understand it, is like this. There is simply life. And life just continues on no matter what. You just find yourself in different places. So, this is kind of... actually, this kind of ties into... I'm going to read Mr. Linux Noob's question here, because both of these kind of are along the same lines, and we could probably catch two of these birds with one stone. So Mr. Linux Noob says, okay, is there a reason we're all on this planet? Because we messed... sorry, let me try that again. He says, okay, is there a reason we're all on this planet is because we messed up and committed a theft or something? Like, why are we here? Is the universe trying to figure itself out, or are we trying to figure out the universe? So both of these questions are kind of along the same lines. So every plane of existence, whether we're dealing with an underworld or not, kind of depends on perspective. So you have to think of this plane as, say, Portland, Oregon, or Salem, Maine, or Detroit, or some, or like a city or a place, right? And so there's a lot of reasons why people are in any one place at any given time, right? So there's an indigenous population that live in that particular place. There are people who are trying to get out of that place, and there are people trying to get in. So let's say you live in a really bad neighborhood, right? You look across the water or whatever, and you see a big city. You see Portland or something, and the place you're at is really bad, and so you look up at Portland from like a lower plane of existence, and you're like, that is heaven. That is lattes as Buffalo Wild Wings. That's heaven there. I want to get there. Right? So one man's hell is another man's heaven. As you climb the ladder, where you are is always the underworld, and where you're getting is always heaven. It's always the place you want to be. So a lot of people are coming into the underworld from a lower plane. And so they're ascending like they're supposed to. They're climbing the rungs of the ladder. Some people are here because there's a job to do. Like they came to the underworld because they have to save someone, because they have work to do on themselves. People are tourists. They come to the underworld because they want to sightsee. There's... and some people are sent to the underworld because they did something naughty, like Mr. Linux Noob's question implies, and so they're being punished. So they get sent to Siberia, to work off some karmic debt or something. So these ideas are not as fixed as people think. There's a lot of movement going on back and forth, and so things like the 9 worlds of Norse mythology, things like underworld, things like heaven, these are all just bookmarks, right? They're just convenient placeholders for your mind, so it has something to measure things against. But it's all very fluid, right? There's things that are happening back and forth all the time. And so like if you end up here and you do some bad stuff while you're here, let's say you come as a tourist, right? But you kind of get sucked into, the underworld lifestyle, and you do some really naughty things. Yeah, you're going to end up getting stuck here. A lot of times one of the big dangers of coming here is that you forget. You forget why you're here. You forget everything you did before. You forget where you're going. You come here, you are given a name, you're given a family, you're given a nation and a religion, and you just assume all that identity. And so it's easy to forget. And so you rack up some karmic debt, you forget all you knew before, and then you end up getting recycled here over and over and over again. One of the big I don't believe in the prison planet philosophy. I don't. I think this place becomes a prison for people. I think it becomes a prison for people. But I don't believe that it's necessarily a prison. It's like the doors are always open, but you can't find them again. So yeah, there's just a lot going on. I need to speed this up a little bit. Let's move on to the next question. Kathy Dennis says, brought this over from my comment on the 18th video. I am not yet sure if you're regarding Christ or the Holy Spirit. I am looking forward to more for sure. I have always been a minimalist and spiritual, but just recently started to engage and reach out to the Holy Spirit and have actually felt a deeper sense of awareness in my spirit. I'm also very interested in the early Church of Christ. I have been blessed to find some people in my hometown that have beliefs, so have a small fellowship group which has been very helpful in dealing with inner healing. Oh, that's awesome. Bless you and thank you for taking the time to do these videos. Love from Canada. Oh, thanks, Kathy. I really appreciate that. And here's from the US. So I'm not really sure on the face of it what you mean. I'm not yet sure if you're regarding Christ or the Holy Spirit. I'm not sure if you're asking about my personal belief in it or if you're asking how it fits into everything else. So I'm going to answer this the best I can. And if I'm misunderstanding, feel free to leave a comment, Kathy, to clarify, and then I'll try and type a clarification as best I can. So there is the Christ bit is kind of a complicated thing, just because there's a lot going on there. So the thing that makes people who are part of the mystery school system and gets us in trouble is that we don't really particularly we don't have any particular need to follow orthodoxy. By that I mean like the heathen community, for example, gets really upset like if you compare if you deviate outside of the heathen worldview or the things that are specifically said in the Norse poems and stuff. Same thing with the Christians; they get really upset if you deviate, and it just seems to be kind of just the way it is, right? People, they get locked into their mindset of things, and then it gets very difficult to break out of that. Like I said a minute ago, if you think you understand the gods, if you think you understand God, you don't understand the gods, or you don't understand God. And it's the same thing I think when we come to things like Christ and the Holy Spirit and some of these other things. So I'm going to tackle Christ first, and then we'll move on to the Holy Spirit. Okay? So the first thing, and this is usually really uncomfortable for people. And I don't know, Kathy, where you stand on religion and all of that stuff. But there is a set of myths that surround sun gods. sons of God, I guess you could say. So we have Tammuz. Let's see how many of these I can get off the top of my head. You have Tammuz, you have Horus, you have Balder, the Norse mythologies. You have Christ, of course. You have Mithra, is another one. But their stories follow their myths and stuff follow the arc of the sun. And so, for better or for worse, so I mean, how do I put this? So there's multiple layers to stories, right? There's is Christ a literal person side of the story? Is Christ a symbol side of the story? And then you have the sun god aspect of Christ, where his story follows the story of the sun. For like a lot of people don't realize that the wedding feast of Cana, for example, wasn't like a physical wedding. It was a yearly festival that happened, and so always happened in early spring, and so it was the time of year when the sun marries the earth, and they celebrate basically the spring rains. So the sun marries the earth, and then the sacred fluid, the rain, comes down and rains on the earth and makes the grapes grow. And then grapes, of course, you turn grapes into wine. And so when Christ, the Son, comes into his ministry at the wedding feast of Cana, that's like when he first. That's like the first. I believe it's like the first miracle. That's when he like officially starts his ministry at the wedding feast of Cana in early spring. That's when Jesus, the Son of God, turns the water into wine, and you could follow this right along with the seasons and astrology and all of this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the way I personally see Christ and the way that I understand him so far. I mean, because there's a profound mystery here, right? You'd be foolish to say that there isn't a profound mystery here. But the way I wrap my head around it is that these sons of God, Balder, Christ, Tammuz, Horus, that his story is basically about the sun. And the things that the sons of God have that are very common to their various myths is that they represent the transformational knowledge, right? They represent the thing that takes, well, any light, like even just a light that comes from a lamp or whatever. The thing that actually makes light is a breakdown of the atomic particles inside of something. That's what makes the light bloom. Doesn't matter if you're dealing with fire, or you're igniting a gas like in a fluorescent light, or if it's like a filament, or it's an atomic bomb, or any of that. That always happens when something on a very chemical level is transferred into something radically different. Like taking wood and heating it up to the point where the particles break down and it turns it into carbon. And this is where we get mental alchemy from. This is where a lot of that light symbolism comes from. It comes from the sun. It comes from gnosis. And that's ultimately what I think Christ represents, is that transformational concept where it takes you from a base consciousness to a base person, and through Christ or Balder or Tammuz or whatever, you're transitioned out of base consciousness into something bigger than you were before. So that's kind of where I come from that, and I'm sorry if that upsets anyone, but that's just the way I see it, and that's a very common way that a lot of the mystery schools see it as well. So the second part of your question was about the Holy Spirit and early church, in the early church. So again, with the heresies, I'm really good at giving people heresies. Um, Early church is really interesting. So, just after Christ did his thing, speaking of Jesus, there was a bunch of different Christian sects. Actually, the word Christian is actually one of the many sects, and I can't remember all of them. You have like the sect of Nazarenes, you had the sect of Christians, you had the Gnostics, you had the Essenes. Um, there was a bunch of them. There was a lot, and one of the things that was present in a lot of those old ones was the divine feminine, which was the sacred feminine part of God. And the Catholic Church didn't like that very much. The and I'm sorry if any of you are Catholic. I don't mean to crap on Catholicism, but the early church, they just we kind of go back to the Church of Saturn, where they didn't, speaking of a God who doesn't like his father and he doesn't like his mother, the sacred feminine was erased out of Christianity at the Council of Nicaea. It was just gone. And in a lot of those early church works, such as the Gnostic texts that just showed up in the 1950s, and a lot of the other extra biblical gospels and stuff, it's very clear that there was a divine feminine force that initiated creation. So God himself has a divine feminine part of himself. The Gnostics called her Barbello. And then there's like a lesser goddess who was part of the initiation process for our world and our creation by the name of Pistis Sophia, or Zoe. And they were really big on the divine feminine portion of God. And that family, that sacred family, is always in all of the early, in all pantheons. It's all in pantheons. It's there in the pantheons of India. I can't remember all of those. I'm not as familiar with the Indian pantheon, the Indian schools. But I do remember there's a divine trinity there. And then we have Osiris, Isis, and Horus, father, mother, son. We have father, mother, son, Odin, Frigg, and Balder in the Norse mythology. I mean, they're everywhere. And so, we talk about the Son of God, right? The Son of God. So the sun outside, go look outside, that's Horus, or that's Christ, or Jesus. It's Balder. So this is the Son of God who goes to the underworld where we are. The Father is Sirius, the star Sirius. It's actually a binary star, Sirius A and Sirius B. We in the North America, we can't really see Sirius this time of year, but it's actually two stars, and that's the mother and the father, and this is the son, right here. And so in the early Christianity, they completely did their best to divorce themselves from the divine feminine. And so the sacred feminine part of God became the Holy Spirit. And this benign, enigmatic thing that no one's really sure what it is. It's the part of God who, kind of just talks to God for you. It was kind of just relegated to the back burner. So, in my opinion, in my belief, is that that the Holy Spirit is actually the sacred feminine part of God. It's the part of God who is the emotional part of God. It's the part of God who initiates creation, who has desires, and all of that kind of stuff. Which is why it's able to interpret your feelings and give that to God in a way that makes sense. That's my opinion and my belief on it. So I hope that, Kathy, I hope that helps. And again, if I misunderstood the question, please, it goes that, it's that way for any of you. If I misunderstood your question or you want to follow up, just, write a follow up down below and I'll do my best to answer. Rain Store asks, do you think there will be a resurgence of interest in God and the gods? Also, what exactly do the gods were or are? Are they aliens? I've missed a few videos because I regularly swear off YouTube, so I apologize if I ask things you may have already answered. So that's a really good question. Kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, I think we kind of answered part of this earlier on in the video. Like I said, what we see as divine changes depending on the people and what they believe. So before it was fairies, then it was angels, then it was Mother Mary. Some people call them the gods. Some people call them aliens. It's just, the Native Americans would call them the ancestors or the sky people. What we see is just hard to explain, right? It's just outside of our mind's ability to comprehend it. So our mind fills in the blanks. It fills in the blanks. It's bigger than what we could see. And so to the modern American, we would call them space aliens because it fits within our paradigm. Ultimately, all of us are space aliens. You go back far enough in our history, our spirits have had to come here from somewhere. All of this matter had to come from somewhere, and most of it didn't come from here. So, you just, whatever helps you fit it into a paradigm. If it's easier for you to call them aliens, then sure, they're aliens. It's just kind of, I'm content. I mean, I know enough to know that I don't know enough to answer that with any certainty. So I try and do my best just to be careful when I answer these things. But as far as a resurgence of interest in the God and gods, yes and no. That's a really good question. I think there's going to be a certain group of people as the gods get closer. I think there's going to be a certain group of people who kind of come out of the woodwork. And there's a resurgence in that way. As far as a full-blown reformation and everyone comes awake and everyone suddenly realizes that God, that they've been missing out until the gods actually get here, I would be kind of surprised if that happens. I kind of don't think so. The trend is more towards atheism and ego worship, which is ego worship is basically like Saturnianism and Satanism, and some of those, which are many people don't realize that Satanism isn't actually the worship of Satan. It's actually the worship of self. I see more of that happening than I do of a full-blown resurgence of spirituality. But I hope I'm wrong. It'd be really awesome if everyone came home. So last question. Angelia Marie says, I'd like to hear more about the history of the Odinic/Norse religion. I've never read any of the mythology or anything, so I'm completely new to it all. I'm sorry. I was attracted to the mystery of it. I see a lot of the parallels between it and Christianity and the Egyptian stories. So, is it all just retelling of the same story? To me, they're telling the story that we're supposed to follow, from death in ignorance to life in resurrection, in obtaining knowledge and a connection to God, the divine. What are your thoughts? First off, spot on on that last bit. Absolutely. Well done, Angelia. Yeah, from death into ignorance to life and the resurrection and obtaining of knowledge and the connection to God. That's spot on. That is absolutely true. As far as so, if you ask a mystery school initiate, yeah, we would absolutely say that there are very similar between these mythologies. In fact, if you want to get really heretical and piss everybody off, you could say that Odin and Brahma and Thoth and Quetzalcoatl. Who's the other one? Prometheus. Prometheus. Or all the same guy. If you really want to make people mad, that's the way to do it. And because not only are their physical figures all described the same way, but as a character study, their personalities are exactly the same. And they all do, their stories are all very similar. They bring writing and knowledge to humanity. They are described as a tall white guy with a long white beard. They all have hung from a tree. Quetzalcoatl was crucified or hung from a tree. Odin hung from a tree. Prometheus was actually hung from a mountain, but very similar. Thoth wasn't necessarily hung from a tree, but he was also responsible for bringing writing and wisdom to humanity. So, absolutely. Yeah. I would say there's definite parallels between all of them. But to say that out loud really makes people mad. So I don't, under most circumstances, I kind of ease people into that. That thing. So as far as the history of things, there's two stories that run side by side. And there's the official story, the official story that has been given to us from historians in a very official capacity. And then there is the real story. And I'm not going to go so far as to say that I think that the historians have deliberately misled people, at least in most cases. That in a lot of, I would say there are some cases in which I think that is the case. The further back you go in history, the closer you get to the time when the gods were here last time. And the closer you get to the time when the gods were here last time, the closer we get to the truth of things. So we see in Old Kingdom Egypt, for example, everything is good, right? They had a very strong sense of the balance between the masculine and feminine principles. You see them honoring the godheads. And then as soon as the Old Kingdom falls and a new dynasty comes in, we see the perversion of the religion start taking place. Where instead of doing what's right and what's good to get to heaven, you could start buying your way into heaven. That kind of thing. Which is a real disservice to people, saying that you can buy your way into heaven. And we kind of get into the same thing, I think, with the Norse mythology. So, like, early on, you get to like the very earliest historical traces of the Norse and their belief systems, it's probably the more accurate. And then, like, even with the runes, it's harder with the Norse because all their stuff, all mystery school traditions were always verbal. It's taught from master to student. And it still is that way today, at least it's supposed to be. And so there really isn't any like really solid historical evidence back then. But what we do have is the runes. And that original set of 24 runic characters, just like we have an original set of 24 Jewish characters. And the reason there's 24 characters is because it's based on the base 12 counting system. And that there's a lot to go into when it comes to the base 12 counting system, but it's a counting system that was given to us by the gods. And so as you pass through time, we see the runic alphabets being kind of destroyed until we get to the newest sets of runes where there isn't really a lot there anymore. Most of the runes are missing. It's all shorthand. People started using the runes to actually write with, saying, "Hey, Paul, would you come over to my house tonight?" Instead of using it as a sacred language and as a set of symbols. And so, and it's that way with all of it. We see it with Christianity as well. The original story, we have the exoteric story, which is, how, we started off with Christ, and then we had all the, which was good, and then everyone got together, and it was all great at the Council of Nicaea, everyone was all united, and then, the Catholic Church came into being, and then, the Catholic Church did the Catholic Church thing, and then there was a Reformation, and that was good, and now we finally got to the truth of everything. Rather than, so that's the exoteric version of it, the official version of it, but the subtle version and the esoteric version is the original Gnostic, in my opinion, like the original Gnostic texts. And then as time progressed, powers that be edited things out until we get to what we have today, which is just a shadow of its original form. So it's hard to say, if you want like the official version, there's all kinds of material online, YouTube videos and stuff to watch. I definitely believe in reading the mythology. Like, I really like Neil Gaiman's book. It distills a lot of the old stories out, and just kind of makes it more universally readable, way more readable, and they're perfectly acceptable. They're a lot more penetrable. It's a lot less impenetrable than like the original poetry. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's dicey territory, I guess is what you can say. Just because it is with a lot of the stuff when you're dealing with the mysteries, it's really hard to tell people the truth because people are so married to their orthodoxy. People, they want to be right. They don't believe that there's a possibility that they could be wrong. And that's the hard part. That's the hard part. If you, like I said like 3 times I think in this video, if you think you understand God, you don't understand God. If you think you understand who Jesus is, you don't understand Jesus. If you think you understand the truth, you don't understand the truth. It's bigger, it's stranger, it's more complex. There's more sides to it than you've ever even believed possible. And, so the question you have to ask, with all of this stuff, you guys, is do you really want to know the truth, or do you want to believe what's told to you, right? And that's hard. Believe me, it's hard. I spent a lot of years in a lot of doubt, being really afraid that I've done it wrong. It's scary to step out, and but the thing is, God is too big to lose. Right? It's physically impossible to lose God because you're in its mind at all times. There is no losing God. It's impossible. If you lose God, you cease to exist. You're gone. Right? There is no losing God. As long as you exist, you are in his mind at all times. So, it's important to be able to ask those tough questions, be honest with yourself. Do you really want to know the truth? And if you grew up in a really heavily a lot of Christian orthodoxy, it doesn't matter which faith you grew up in, even in heathenism. If you grew up in heathenism and you've dedicated to the orthodoxy of heathenism, are you more interested in staying with the orthodoxy, or do you want to know the real truth of things? And if you want to know the real truth of things and you mean it, you have to be willing to hear hard truths. You have to be willing to hear things that don't agree with you. And that's hard. And a lot of that involves, understanding that the Son of God is the Son, on one level. It involves reading books that aren't the Bible. For my birthday, I got this, Egyptian Book of the Dead, full of real color pages, excited about it. Because there's perspectives I've never seen before. There are things I don't understand. And it doesn't matter how far you go, you are always a student. The master of masters himself, Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, says that all the time. For all your progress but lengthens the goal. The higher you climb but raises the mountain. A famous quote from him, Thoth, the famous quote from Thoth said that, "To you I am a god, but there are those to whom I am nothing more than an insect." And it just puts things into perspective, So there is no getting to the end. There is no getting to the truth. If you think you understand the truth, you don't understand the truth. And that's kind of my spiel. I know this was a long video. I appreciate you sticking with me through the whole thing. I'm really glad that I was able to answer all these questions. So I'm just going to go ahead and post it as one long video. I thought about cutting it in half, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, so thank you everyone for your questions. I hope I answered them to your satisfaction. Some of these I might actually make a whole video on later on, because some of these are fantastic questions and deserve a more in-depth answer than I was able to give. So, all right. Well, I love you. Stay cool out there, and I'll talk to you later. All right. Bye-bye.